Umpisahan na natin ang debating ito. But first, all the candidates will be giving their opening statements. Gentlemen, your opening statement will answer the question, what will be your key priority programs if elected president? And how will you realize these in the next 6 years? Senator Bongbong Marcos, 2 minutes.
Maraming salamat sa lahat na nabigyan kami ng pagkakataon upang pag-usapan ang ating mga problema na hinaharap. Sa tagal ng aking pagsiservisyo, ngayon lang po ako nakakita ng ganitong krisis na hinaharap ng ating bansa ngayon. At pagka tinatanong ko sa taong bayan kung ano ang kanilang kauna-unahang pangangailangan, ang laging sagot sa akin ay trabaho, trabaho, trabaho. Kaya't dapat natin magdagdag ng trabaho para mabigyan ng mas magandang buhay ang mga naghihingalo ngayon dahil sa pandemya, dahil sa krisis na dala rin ng pandemya. Sa aking palagay, ang mga sektor na ito ay unang-una yung MSMEs, yung micro, small, medium scale enterprises. Dahil 95.5% ng ating negosyo ay nasa kategoryang yan, 62% ng employment ng mga employer ay nasa kategoryang yan. Kaya at bukod pa ron, sa pag-aaral ko, nakita ko na sa bawat gastos ng gobyerno, malakas ang balik ng pag-create ng trabaho, dadami ang trabaho. Pangalawa, agrikultura. Kailangan natin patibayin ang agrikultura natin, pagandahin uli natin ang agricultural sector natin. Dahil napabayaan ito na matagal at nakita nung pagdating ng pandemya kung paano tayo naghirap dahil umaasa na lang tayo sa importasyon. Bukod pa ron ay maraming trabaho ulit ang may bibigay kapag tayo ay nag-invest sa agrikultura. Pangatlo, isa sa pinakamabilis sa aking nakikita na industriya na makapagbigay ng trabaho ay ang industriya ng turismo. Ang industriya ng turismo ay madali kasi ibigawin natin ito para sa ating mga kababayan. At sa ilalim nito ay ang ating infrastruktura, kasama na dyan ang digital infrastructure para pagandahin ang ating internet, palawakin
Senator
ang ating
Marcos,
bandwidth,
the time is up na po.
ang ating internet service.
Thank you, Senator Marcos.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the 4 presidential candidates who had both the political commitment and the political courage to be part of this conversation. My area of research and expertise is on foreign policy and defense and security, so my first question will be within the rubric of these issue areas. All right. If the Quad were to become a collective security alliance, you, as our country's chief architect of our foreign policy, are you going to make the Philippines as a member of the Quad? Why and why not?
Senator Marcos?
Yes, I think any of these agreements we should, of course, encourage as long as it is very clear to us what is the advantage to the Philippines. What the professor just mentioned was she spoke about the great powers trying to carve out spheres of influence. I reject that model that I believe no longer applies in the geopolitics of the modern world. The old Cold War thinking. We have to ply our own way. And so it really would depend on what is inside, or what those agreements say that the Philippines, what will be doing and what those other partners of ours will be doing for the Philippines. And once again, because we shouldn't think of the old Cold War system, we should always think in terms of the fine line that the Philippines has to tread in all our foreign policy decisions.
But if Mr. Marcos, if you reject the concept of spheres of influence, does that mean you're going to scuttle the Mutual Defense Treaty when you become President of the Republic?
By no means.
link to
By
the
no
United
means.
States of America as a defense ally.
No, by no means. The relationship with the United States, our special relationship with the United States is not something that we can treat, be cavalier about. It is a very important one. And it has stood us in good stead for over 100 years. And that, I think, will never disappear from the Philippine psyche, the idea and the memory of what the United States did for us and fought with us in the last war. And so that is a specific part of our foreign policy. But then as we approach, we know that we are a hot spot right now. The West Philippine Sea is a hot spot in geopolitics right now. And that is why we still have to find our own line in terms of all of these arrangements. Except the one simple principle is that we will not cede 1 square inch of the Philippines to any country.
Karen, do I have time for one more follow-up with Mr. Marcos?
Yes, Professor Carlos.
Yeah. Okay, if that is the stance that you have taken, Mr. Marcos, suppose you have a situation where China is trying to, take us in, embrace us within its sphere of influence. How would you react as our chief architect of our foreign policy?
Once again, in terms of specifically to China, the correct approach still seems to be one of engagement. And no matter what the superpowers are trying to do, we have to work in the interest of the Philippines, and we cannot allow ourselves to be part of the foreign policy of any other country. And we have to have our own foreign policy. So again, whatever the superpowers do, we as a highly strategic geographic, having a highly strategic geographical location in the world, really have to walk that very, very fine line between these great powers who, I always say, these are great powers, we are in between. If they sneeze at the same time, we disappear from the map. And that is something that we always have to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Our next question will be coming from Attorney Rolex Suplico. Attorney, your question please.
Madamong salamat, Karen. Mayong gabi sa tanan. Issue po ng kahit kaninong administrasyon, ang korupsyon, na tinatansyang may epekto sa mahigit kumulang 20% ng budget ng pamahalaan kada taon. Ngayong magkakaroon ng bagong Pangulo, kailangan muling iakyat sa talakayan ang pagnanais na matigil ang pangungurakot, sapagkat ang isang malinis na gobyerno ay nagsisimula sa isang tapat at marangal na Pangulo. Kung kayo po ay magiging Pangulo, una, kusa mo bang ilalabas o hindi sa publiko ang iyong SALN or Statement of Assets, Liabilities and Net Worth? At pangalawa, kusa ka bang magsasagawa ng waiver sa mga provision ng RA 1405 na nagbabawal sa pagpaalam sa publiko ng laman ng inyong mga bank accounts?
This question will be first answered by Senator Bongbong Marcos.
Well, sa issue ng pagbigay o ng salin, para sa akin, hindi problema yon. At hindi lang ako nagsusulat ng salin for the last 6 years. Pero kung ako'y maging mapalad sa darating na halalan, ay natural, ay kailangan gagawa ng salin at ito ibibigay ko sa publiko pag hihingin sa akin. Ngayon, sa aking palagay, yan ang desisyon ko bilang isang individual. Sa aking palagay ay hindi na kailangan palitan ng batas at nasa sa bawat opisyal na yan kung sila ba ay handa na ilabas ang kanilang salin. At siyempre dadagdag ko kung may kaso na may court order na sasabihin ilabas ang salin, ay kailangan talagang ibigay. Pag na-mandate ng isang korte, maliwanag na talagang ibigay at ipalaman. Sa sarili ko lamang, para maging maliwanag, kapag ako ay susulat muli ng salin, ito ay gagawin kong public information.
Senator Marcos.
Sa aking palagay, kung sino ang nasa batas na sinasabi kailangan sumulat ng salin, ay kung nasa sa kanya, kung sila ay maglalabas. Ngayon, ang pamilya ko naman ay siguro hindi dahil pamilya ko kailangan magsulat ng salin at kailangan ilabas. Kaya siguro yung aking sinasabi ay lahat na kung may papilya man ako na nakaupo, na sumusulat ng salin, ay sa palagay ko handa rin sila na ilabas lahat yan.
Nagbabalik po ang SMNI Presidential Debate 2022. At sa ating pagpapatuloy, ang magtatanong naman po ngayon ay ang Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink Ang II. Mr. Ang, go ahead.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Professor Carlos started us off with a foreign policy question, and I'd like to ask something similar where it converges with gut issues. The public discourse on the West Philippine Sea often glosses over the interests of the smallest stakeholders. It was refreshing to hear several candidates for president mention the need to allow Filipinos to fish in the disputed areas. But we have not heard specifics. The concern for our fisherfolk seems to be growing on a larger audience, particularly the young voters, as evidenced by the release just days ago of a music video featuring the rock band Sponge Cola and singer Karil. If elected president, how will you look after the interests of small fishermen who are occasionally harassed by foreign vessels and often crowded out in the controversial area by fishing boats from countries with competing territorial claims like Vietnam, Taiwan, and of course, China?
Senator Marcos?
Marami talaga tayong issue, hindi lamang sa conflicting claims sa gitna ng Pilipinas at saka China. Kaya't ngayon lang ang nakita kong national election na naging issue ang West Philippine Sea or ang foreign policy. At sa palagay ko, sa dami ng ating kailangan ay ayusin, sa ating pagsasama, sa pagkaalyansa natin sa China, ay unahin natin ito. Ito ang pinakauna na dapat natin simulaan, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda doon sa kanilang palaisdaan na matagal na ginagamit, na daan-daang taon na. Siguro naman, may papaliwanag natin sa China na ang mga bangka ay hindi naman military threat yan sa kanila. Bakit sila maglalagay ng warship doon? Ngunit kailangan natin magresponde. Kung maulit yung nangyari noon, tayo magpadala naman tayo ng Navy o kahit na Coast Guard para merong military presence, meron tayong presence of the state na nandoon, na nasa lugar na yun. Pangalawa, puntahan natin ang ASEAN at magpatulong tayo sa ASEAN. Dahil ang ASEAN ay meron din binubuo na code of conduct para sa ASEAN at saka sa China, at sana maipasa na yan. Punta pati tayo sa UN at magpadala tayo ng delegation sa Beijing para kausapin ang Presidente Xi at sasabihin paano ba natin ayusin ito at paano ba natin gagawin para hindi na maulit itong nangyari sa nakaraan.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. Mr. Ang, any follow-up questions?
Yes, the question is what specific policies you will adopt. You know, and Senator Marcos, you mentioned in the interview you had with DZRH and the Manila Times earlier that you wanted to use diplomacy over military solutions. I mean, are you changing that policy now?
No.
And in that same interview, Calyodi was saying that he wanted to make the West Philippine Sea a zone of peace. And now he's talking about possibly escalating the situation in that area. It's undeniably that we have to deal with China. The question is, as president, how will you do it? No,
the reason I spoke about putting a military presence there is so that the government, the Republic of the Philippines, has a presence there to show to China that we are defending what we consider our territorial waters. And that is not for them to go there to fire upon the Chinese vessels, but merely to make their presence felt so that the Chinese know we are aware of what they are doing, we do not agree with what they are doing, and we carry on with our diplomatic back channel, side channel, whatever way we can do to fix the problem and make us have a system so that we no longer have this problem again. Furthermore, I think, as I said, that this is not something that that we should consider as isolated from the general problem or the general discussions that we are having with the People's Republic. It should be the first part, in my view, because what we are, as Filipinos, we are most concerned at this moment, the immediate concern, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda dun sa kanilang palisdaan. Yun ang unahin natin. Ngayon, pag nakahanap tayo ng kasunduan sa People's Republic of China, ay siguro baka nasimulaan na natin ang pag-uusap tungkol sa West Philippine Sea. Dahil kung nasabi natin, amin yan, at tumanggap sila, umpisa na yan. Diyan tayo magsisimula at dahan-dahan natin itong problema na meron tayo sa China.
Professor Clarita Carlos.
Yes, there is no doubt that what is being fought over here is fish, isda. No? And so there is also no doubt that the food security of China cannot be at the expense of the food insecurity of the rest of us. Now let's move away from the pseudo-militaristic perspectives that some of you have noted earlier. And how about thinking about a regional fishing agreement, which is along the lines that Mr. Abella talked about a while back. The reason why I talked about that is, well, there's a personal reason, because I'm writing a book on regional fishing agreement. And since any one of you will become the President of the Republic of the Philippines, I was wondering if it is worth writing that book on a regional fishing agreement.
Why not?
Who wants to take on that question and statement
if
first?
I may,
Senator Marcos.
I beg to differ that this is about fish. It is not about fish, in my view. It is about territorial waters, and that when we have these 200 Chinese boats coming and blocking our fishermen, it is to assert their claim that this is part of their territorial water. And that is why you cannot separate the problems that we're having with the fishermen from the larger problem that we are having in our conflicting claims with China, and for that matter, for other countries in ASEAN. And that's why we have to look at it as maybe an opening. I always mention this, that we have to try every single way we can. And I remind everyone that China and the United States came together because of ping pong. And who would have thought that that's where it would start? Who knows where our coming together will start?
But isn't that related, Mr. Marcos, to my earlier question about the Quad? You know, if you have a whole array of, militia there, wanting to take over the whole of the contested South China Sea, shouldn't you lean on the Quad as a collective security arrangement?
No, because that is a military solution, and that proposes a military solution. And I do not think we want a military solution, because we simply do not want a war. I do not think China wants a war. I do not think the United States wants a war. The Philippines certainly does not want a war.
Well, but Mr. Gonzalez just said that China only recognizes naked power. So what are we talking about?
I don't think that is the method for us to come to an agreement with the People's Republic of China. There are three ways to gain territory. One is upon agreement with arbitration by an international body, agreement of two or more parties. Number two is war. And number three is bilateral agreement. We're left only, I think, with bilateral agreement, and that's what we should pursue.
Thank you.
MJ, your question, please.
Thank you, Attorney Karen. Medyo mainit yung talakayan sa issue ng China and West Philippine Sea. Now let's get back to the basics. Gentlemen, if you become the next President of the Republic, how do you plan to feed the 110 million Filipinos and the next generation if the prices of staple foods continue to increase? Specific po sana ang paglalatag po ng mga plano. Maraming salamat.
Senator Marcos, answering the same question.
Ganun talaga, kailangan natin ayusin ang sektor natin ng agrikultura. At nakita kaagad ito nung pagdating ng pandemya na hindi tayo makapag-supply ng pagkain para sa ating mga kababayan dahil umaasa na lang tayo sa importation. Umaasa tayo sa importation dahil hindi na pinaganda ang agricultural sector. Kaya't sang-ayon ako sa sinabi ni Calio din na dapat ibisahan natin sa R&D. Kailangan yung mga, lalo na may climate change ngayon, yung mga bagong varieties ng palay, ng kahit na lahat ng tanim, ay pag-aralan natin para mas magandang magiging ani. Tapos lahat ng ayuda, lahat ng fertilizer, lahat ng pesticide, dapat makabili tayo ng mura. Tapos may pautang. Kaya siyempre kasama dyan yung patubig. Hanggang sa post-harvest facilities, hanggang sa processing, dadagdagan ko lang hanggang sa pag-retail. Dahil kung ang gobyerno ang humahawak sa buong production sa buong linya ng produksyon hanggat sa pagbenta sa retail, ay ang gobyerno ay hindi dapat kumita. Kaya maipagbibili nila ng mas mura. Dito ay naranasan na natin ito. Nung nagkaroon tayo ng Masagana 99 dun sa production, meron tayong IRI at saka PhilRice dun sa R&D, meron tayong FTI dun sa NFA, ng price stabilization, hanggang sa Kadiwa store. Yun siguro ang modelo na pwede natin gayahin at ulitin.
I just want to ask about comparative advantage when we're talking about rice, because it's a basic economic precept that says you shouldn't make things that others can make cheaply. And many people have said that the Philippines lacks a comparative advantage in rice. So should we insist? I think this is related to the question of MJ with regard to food security policy. Should we insist on continuing planting a crop that we clearly don't have a comparative advantage?
Yes, I think we do. Simply because it is of strategic value to a state to have a good supply of food. So that, again, like any crisis that comes, magkagera man, magkaalitan man tayo sa Thailand at saka sa Vietnam, sapat ang ating supply ng simulaan natin sa palay. Ngunit kailangan din yung lahat ng isda, lahat din ng nag-aalaga ng hayop, ay kailangan yon lahat ay patulungan natin para kahit ano pang mangyari. Kagaya ng pandemya, nakita natin kaagad, napaabot na nga tayo sa sitwasyon na mahirap paniwalaan na ang Pilipinas ay nag-i-import ng galunggong. At dapat naman siguro hindi tayo nasa ganung sitwasyon. Pagka nagka-problema ulit, mahirap na naman tayo. Kaya't kailangan natin tulungan. At kahit na sinasabi namin mas mura, bili na tayo ng bili, may strategic na problema yan. Dahil pagka nagkagulo, wala tayong supply.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. We'll go to our next question. Our next question is from Mrs. Vilma Absalon, mother of slain FEU football player Keith Absalon, who was a victim of NPA.
Magandang araw sa inyong lahat, tatagapakinig. Ako po si Vilma Balandra Absalon, ina ni Keith Balandra Absalon, ng FEU football player na walang awang pinatay ng NPA. Kami po ay taga-Masbate. Kung ikaw ay magiging Pangulo ng ating bansa, ano ang direktiba o layunin mo upang matuldukan ang mga terorismong walang awang pumapatay ng mga taong walang kasalanan? At sana tuluyang mapuksa na wala nang ulit na mangyayari na pumatay pa sila ng inusinting tao tulad ng aking anak. Ayoko na ang ating bayan ay maging magulo pa dahil sa kanila. Yun ang hinahanap ko po sa mga Pangulo na maipahayag nila ang kanilang layunin sa mga terorismo. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
For this question from Mrs. Vilma, we have Senator Marcos answering first, and then we'll have Secretary Abella, Calyodi, and Secretary Gonzales.
Ang unang responsibilidad ng kahit sino na elected official sa aming pagsusumpa is to defend and protect the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. And that includes the defense of our people and of our Republic. Kaya't kung may lumalaban, gustong pabagsakin ng gobyerno, ay kailangan depensahan ng kanyang ng Estado, ng gobyerno, ang sarili niya, at ang kapakanan ng taong bayan. At kaya tuloy-tuloy, itong problema na ito, tuloy-tuloy dapat ang ating gawing peace talks hanggang nagkaroon na tayo ng talagang matunay na agreement ng kapayapaan. Kasama dyan ay yung balik-loob program na ginagawa. Patuloy natin yan, nakasabay yung NTFL Cup na nagiging very effective doon sa ating paglaban dito sa problema nito.